Hey guys, welcome back to the video series. We are building a passive income business with affiliate marketing. And in this fourth episode, I want to talk about search engine optimization, or SEO for short. I've mentioned it in the previous videos. And in this one, I want to give an introduction to the topic and talk about some of the fundamental things that you need to understand so that we can move on with the rest of the course. So first of all, SEO is a very broad topic. It is an industry in itself. This video will not do it justice. I just want to cover some of the fundamental things. And in future videos, I'll talk about more of the intermediate and advanced topics in SEO. So in this video, we're going to cover what a search engine is, some basic questions like why do we need one? And we're also going to take a quick look at the history of search engines. I think it's quite interesting how they've developed. And I think a lot of people don't remember some of the early search engines. I know I certainly didn't before Google came out as the clear winner. And we'll also talk about in the last half of the video the key elements of good SEO, and we'll expand on those in future videos. So first, a quick definition of SEO. This is my kind of definition. It is the art and science of ranking a web page for its target keywords in a particular search engine. So in this case, we're mainly talking about Google, but it could be other search engines. Amazon also features a search engine, sort of Pinterest, Facebook. These are all sort of built upon search engines, but primarily we talk about Google for SEO. So combining both the science, right, upon which Google is founded, but also I find that there are elements of art because, no one outside of Google truly understands how the algorithm works. And so there are some elements of experience and sort of, making decisions based on how you understand the algorithm. And second, I want to introduce two basic topics, or two basic terms rather. So first is what we call a keyword, and a keyword is anything that you type into Google. So whatever those words are, it doesn't have to be a single word. It can be multiple words. It can be a phrase. It can be a question. That is what we call the keyword, is what you type in. And once you type in a keyword and you search in Google, it will return something called a SERP, or a search engine results page. It's basically all the results, all the websites that show up, including not just the websites, but also things in modern search engines. We have search features, and I'll talk about this in another video, but things like people also ask, or maybe it'll return images or knowledge panels of things that are already known. Those would also be considered as part of the SERP. And sometimes we call it, just for shorthand, page 1 or the first page. But the SERP includes not just page 1, it's also page 2, all the way down to page 10, all of the results that Google is going to return to us. All right, so what is a search engine and why do we need one? These sound like pretty obvious questions. When we go back in time a little bit, I think you'll see quite evidently why the search engine is far superior. So what do we do before we had sort of internet-based search engines? Well, we had directories, right? We had things like yellow pages, right? You could flip through your yellow pages and call a plumber in your area, or remember we had in the library, we had the Dewey Decimal System, right? A way of categorizing books based on what type of topic they covered. And essentially, in most of human life, this is how we organize things. We didn't have sort of this sophisticated algorithm to go and find things for us. We had to categorize it somehow so that we can go back and retrieve it. And one of the early attempts to categorize or organize the internet was a company called Yahoo. I'm sure most of us remember that. In 1994, the founders, Jerry Yang and David Filo, they created a website that was essentially the predecessor to Yahoo, and it looked kind of like this. It was basically a directory. It had, different buckets for different websites, and people would actually submit their website to this Yahoo, and they would say, "Hey, my website's about politics," and they would just get included there. And people would visit Yahoo, and they would say, "Today I feel like reading up on some politics," and they go click through that, and that's how they found things. So that seems pretty arcane to us today, right? When we have Google. So the race for the search engine began right shortly after, in the mid 90s. We had all these all these sort of search engines that I don't remember for sure. I mean, I was only born in the 90s. And here are some of the companies that came out of that period. And eventually we know who kind of won out, right? It was actually Google And the predecessor to Google was actually something called Backrub. And I'm going to explain that in just a minute. So here's a further article if you want to take a quick look. So everyone knew that the search engine was very important infrastructure for the internet. It was going to be how users find different types of content that they wanted to watch, they wanted to read, and they recognized how important that role was, and also the financial importance of it. You can make a lot of money by serving ads before your organic results. So simply put, from a user experience standpoint, it is far faster and far easier than having to flip through sort of a yellow pages equivalent like Yahoo to find what it is that you're searching for. I mean, today we search for things in milliseconds, right? In milliseconds, you find what it is that you're looking for. And we know who came out victorious. It was Google. So, an interesting question is, why did Google win out over all these competitors? And there may be a lot of other reasons here. I'm only going to cover sort of one of them. So this is not sort of, an expert analysis. So Google took a bit of a different approach. Whereas some of its competitors like Yahoo initially tried to do this sort of, by hand categorization of websites, and maybe the way that they would retrieve information was, by understanding, okay, this website is about politics. So if you search for something about politics, we're going to try to put that website up in our algorithm. So Google took a very different approach, actually. They actually invented, so the founders, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, in 1999, they wrote a white paper at Stanford called Large Scale Hypertextual Web Search Engine. And, in other words, their paper, they wanted to design an algorithm that was going to go crawl the internet. So, they would have bots that would go and try to visit every web page they could find. They would index the pages, right? Save down the pages. Okay, what is the page kind of about, right? Save all the text and images. And then they would serve the relevant pages for the user's query. And central to how this algorithm was going to work is something called backlinks, right? And that's why the original name of the Google was actually called Backrub. Unfortunately, they changed that. So what this backlinks model was going to do was it was going to go find which web pages had the most backlinks and what were those backlinks about. And the inspiration for this model came from academia, where very influential papers are often going to be cited in future papers about that topic, right? It's a way of providing your sources, and it's a way of recognizing that, hey, this earlier paper was very influential to the field and in terms of its contribution. So in the same way, the way that websites link to each other is a signal of how influential web pages are. And by crawling the internet, and back then the internet was much smaller than it is today, but by crawling the internet, they could figure out, hey, which web pages are getting the most number of backlinks, and that's going to make that web page a lot more influential. So here's a quick example, and it's going to illustrate some of how the algorithm, at least the early algorithm, was intended to work. So let's say you have a website about pets, and you write a little blog post about dogs. And in that blog post, you kind of talk about, what kind of things dogs like to eat and things like dog food. And so you put out a link to a pet food website, right? And they sell dog food. And maybe you even put a link to their blog post where they talk about what kind of food to feed your pets. And you would write something called an anchor text. And in that anchor text, you would say something, something, something. You would say dog food. And the dog food portion, you would actually put that as a hyperlink so that it could direct your visitors to that pet food site. So what happens is Google's Googlebot would actually come, it would crawl your article, right? It would come and crawl your website. It would find your blog post about dog food. It would go crawl the article. It would see, something, 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 dog food. And then it would recognize that, oh, okay, this link is actually going to another website. So the anchor text itself tells Google a little bit about what that other website is about, which is in this case dog food. But in addition to the anchor text, your website itself, so Google maybe has some idea that, hey, this guy's website, all he talks about is dogs and cats and pets, so maybe it's kind of like a pet website. And that's going to help also add some relevance for Google's algorithm to say, hey, that link that they're pointing at, that might be something related to this website, right? Because, typically websites link out to related topics, right? Topics that are related to their website. And so by doing this across the entire internet, Google establishes, what each website might be about and what each sort of blog post or article is about. And this proved to be far superior in terms of scalability. That is, when you have millions and millions, and today we have billions of web pages, it was far better than, say, having manual curators go and try to understand what is a website about and then categorizing it. So that's one of the main reasons why Google was successful, is able to scale and provide that user experience that people wanted, right? So really fast searches and really accurate searches. So having finished that quick history lesson, I want to cover some of the elements of good SEO. And these are things we're going to talk a lot more about in the course when we try to design our website and we try to build in these elements so that Google likes our website and is going to give us some traffic. So I would preface this by saying that SEO is constantly changing. That's one thing. And the other thing is there are a lot of different approaches out there. This is only one of them. This is only my sort of 2 cents. So take it with a big grain of salt and definitely read up on what other people are thinking in terms of SEO. So here I think there are 3 big buckets in terms of what you need to do well. The first is the technical side. And this is typically pretty straightforward. It's not something that you would worry about too much once you have it set up. You just want to make sure Google is able to access your website. There's no, technical red flags, that everything kind of loads quickly. And the second is the on-page SEO, which I think is one of the most important parts. It's essentially what you have on your page. It's the words, the images, also the HTML tags, and we'll talk about this on a future slide. And the third thing is off-page. And off-page is literally everything that's not on your page. And in this case, we're talking about backlinks, links from other websites that you don't control, and the process of trying to get those backlinks from other webmasters and try to add those so that Google understands, hey, your website is kind of about that. And the more backlinks you get, the more authoritative you become in the eyes of Google. So let's cover number 1, technical SEO. The basic idea here is you want your website to load quickly. You want it to load correctly for Googlebot, right? So Googlebot is going around crawling millions and millions of websites. And when it shows up on your website, you want to make sure that you're giving Googlebot, free reign to crawl your website. Don't throttle it. Don't slow it down. And the reason is if your website's too slow, or maybe you don't have a very good hosting provider, and Googlebot comes along and your website constantly crashes, you get these called 500 level errors, then Googlebot might think, hey, your website's not doing well, maybe I should come back later. And that means Googlebot's not going to crawl your website as frequently, and sometimes that means you're not going to show up in the index, or you might not show up in the search results, and that's not a good thing for us from an SEO standpoint. So some of the things you can do to make sure you get the technical part right is you got to get a reliable hosting provider. Currently, I use SiteGround, and in the past, I've also used Bluehost. These are sort of very common shared hosting providers, and I'll talk more about hosting in a future video. And I'll put a link for SiteGround. Actually, I think it's a pretty decent starter hosting provider. And the second thing you want to have is you want to be able to manage your website correctly. And I'll talk more about this later on in the course. Essentially, good management entails things like, do you have too many plugins installed if you're using WordPress? Do you have too much bloat that's slowing down your website? Are you optimizing how your website serves things such as images? Are you optimizing images by compressing them? Things like that help make the website load faster and quickly so that Googlebot is happy. And the second thing is on-page SEO. And I'll probably spend a lot of the course talking about on-page. It really is the most important thing that you can actually do to influence SEO, because off-page to a major extent is kind of out of your hands, right? You can try, however you want to try to get other people to add links, but it's not something you directly influence. So the basic idea of on-page is it's what you write in your blog posts and your articles. It's also the images on your pages. Now, in terms of images, I don't think that Google understands images, right? They're not quite there yet. They can do some stuff with images, like they can tell you what an image might be about, but really when we talk about images, we're talking about the alt text or the alternative text that is included with images that tell Google, hey, my image is about this. Okay, so anyways, first of all, Google can't read like a human. Now, there's some debate around this right now, but from my experience, Google is not as smart as people make it out to be, and not yet anyways, right? So we have to help Google understand what our page is about. And the way we do that is we need to put our words, right? We need to use words in our article in a particular way. And typically that means, looking at where you're putting words in the HTML meta tags. So in HTML, we have a few primary meta tags, and a meta tag just tells Google, hey, what is this article about? What are sort of the structural elements of my article? So the first one is the meta title. It is the title that gets served in Google. So if you write an article about dog food, right, in Google itself, someone will see, oh, this, 6 different types of dog food or something, right? That would be the meta title. It's what you see in Google. You also have the H1 or the heading 1 through heading 6. These are different levels of headings. The heading 1 is essentially the title. It is the title of your article when a user comes to your article. Now, usually the meta title can be the same as the H1. That's just a nuance we can talk about in a future video, but for all intensive purposes, the H1 is the title of the article. We have something called paragraph or a P tag in HTML. A paragraph is just normal text that's on your blog post. And then we have some formatting meta tags, like if you want to bold something or italicize something. That is to sort of a lesser extent perhaps used by Google. And then the last thing is anchor text. So anchor text is the text that you use when you hyperlink a word or a phrase, and then you add a backlink to it. So in the example I showed you before, it was dog food, right? In this example with the pet site and the dog food. So dog food is the anchor text. All right, and heading back to here. Okay, so the last thing is off-page SEO. So as we talked about earlier, Google is primarily using backlinks as a way of understanding what other websites are about. It takes a backlink from your site or from another site, and it considers that backlink when it tries to understand what is that website that's being linked to, what is it kind of about. So for off-page, it is sort of a topic in itself in terms of how do we get links. So here are some different ideas and methods that people use. So one is you can contact a lot of other webmasters, a lot of other websites that are related to yours and try to ask them, hey, can I get a backlink to my website? Maybe you have an interesting article. Maybe you have some sort of guest interview or some sort of resource that they can link to. Usually in these days, that's very difficult to do. Most webmasters are too busy, or they're not responsive, or they don't really want to link to you, or they're going to ask you for money. So a lot of that happens. Other options are, one is you might have something that's really interesting. You might want to promote it on, say, social media, or with some of the more of the PR method when you get it promoted through one of the agencies, and see if some of the big websites like CNN, Forbes, maybe some of them will pick it up, and then you'll get a backlink that way. Some of the other methods are, sometimes you just go to find different websites and you offer them money and you say, hey, can I give you $20 for a backlink? And you go and try to find good websites that are relevant to your industry, and some people do it that way. And then, of course, there are, when we'll talk about this in future videos when I cover backlinks, there are more nefarious ways that people try to acquire backlinks, and I wouldn't recommend those at all. But those, it's good to mention sort of what other people are doing. Sometimes people will have, they'll find websites with vulnerabilities in their security system, and then they'll hack those websites, and then they'll insert, backlinks to their own website, or they'll have bots that go around and they go into forums and they go into places like YouTube, and they'll just kind of insert their backlinks there. So there are a lot of different methods, right? Some that are very spammy and kind of nefarious. There are others that are more, legitimate in the eyes of some. And then there are some in the middle, right? Like, do you pay someone for a backlink? Is that allowed? I'll cover that in a future video. But for now, we'll just end it off here, and I'll summarize this video so far. So we've talked about keywords and SERPs. So keywords are whatever you type into Google, and the SERP is what you get out of it. So search engines, right, are far superior to directory listings like Yellow Pages and the original Yahoo. They're much easier to use, much faster. We talked about Google's original algorithm. It was mainly based on backlinks. Today, its algorithm includes many, many more factors, including things like how fast your website loads, are you mobile friendly, all of those things. And again, no one really knows the secret sauce, but we have sort of a general understanding in terms of at the industry level, right? People kind of know how Google treats different web pages. And we talked about the elements of good SEO. And again, everyone has their own opinion. The first thing you want to have is good technical SEO. Make sure your website, it loads quickly and it's responsive. And the second thing is getting your on-page SEO right. So on-page is really about relevancy, making sure that the words and the images and the way that you use HTML meta tags, making sure that corresponds to the keywords that you want to rank for. And the last thing is off-page SEO. So this would be the backlinks that other people's websites have that are pointing to your website, trying your best in terms of, having a strategy to go and acquire those backlinks, because often as a news site, people are not going to link to you organically, right? You're not sort of the New York Times, for example, which would just get backlinks naturally. So you have to go out and figure out, how am I going to get those backlinks to my website so that I can show up higher in Google search results. Okay, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.